So today I'm going to be installing a Noctua NH-U9S Chroma Black that I picked up from Amazon into this HP Omen 30L that I recently purchased. It's about 2 months old. Um, it's pretty straightforward. We should be able to just pop this off, put the new one on. I've already pulled everything out of the box, so that's like the generic bag, and then obviously the heatsink and fan, and then the brackets and spacers for AMD according to the manual. Included with the kit is a Intel parts right there, and then the AMD were in that other section, and they're generic in the bottom. So here we go. Let's get to it. So the system is laying on the bench now, obviously with the side off. I'm taking off the heatsink and the stock heatsink and fan. Make sure you unscrew these all the way. You don't want to be yanking too hard on this thing. The other thing to consider is my cooler actually didn't fit a standard screwdriver. You should be using an Allen, I believe. Mine was an Allen or star bit. And once you get these all the way backed out, go ahead and turn it a little bit, as you can see me doing here. This kind of loosens it up to make sure that it doesn't get stuck and you accidentally pull the CPU out of the socket. Alright, so now I'm going to use some isopropyl alcohol. I like to use 99% just to eliminate any possibility of water on the system components, but I think you can find 95 or something like that in your local store most likely. I bought mine on Amazon. This is just the manual card thing that comes with the Noctua, specific for the AMD. It's talking about you need the backing plate, and here are the parts that are in the kit that you'll need to pull out. And at the beginning of the video I'd already done this. And then it walks through basically how to attach it to the motherboard. It's saying remove, if you have them, remove the stock retention module. This is for a brand new motherboard, which we don't have. And it's, yeah, so I'm pointing out so you can see that's where we'll be attaching our brackets. And then it talks about, depending on which one you have, should be an AM4, which would be these gray standoffs, when it gets the correct height away from the motherboard. So your tension and everything else is proper when you go to affix the, yep, those are the brackets, when you go to affix the heatsink. Pretty straightforward, just screw them down, screw the bracket down, and then it's very simple to attach the heatsink the way Noctua has the system set up. So as I'm doing this, you can see I'm just going to put these standoffs in, and then I'm going to go ahead and put the brackets on and screw them down. I quickly realize as I'm doing this that these brackets do not fit. As you can see, they're much larger than the area. So I thought, oh, well, maybe they go the other way. Something funny with HP. Nope, they just, as you can see, they don't fit at all. So at this point, I'm scratching my head going, okay, what did I get myself into? Is this some sort of weird custom OEM thing? I'm not going to be able to use this kit. What am I going to do? So after thinking about this and head scratching for a few minutes, these are the recommended brackets, right? AM4, AMD brackets that come with the Noctua. And in fact, they do fit a standard AMD motherboard, AM4 motherboard. But what HP decided to do was apparently unify their socket, cooler, whatever, standoffs, motherboard, anyway, so they could use the same kit across all of their motherboards, whether it's Intel or AMD. So these brackets that you see on there now are the Intel brackets that come with the Noctua kit, and they fit perfectly. Now the question is, will the heatsink fit properly? Well, I'm assuming this heatsink is a standard size for an Intel. The screws look exactly like they fit. Now the screw in my right hand there that I'm showing you, that's the one for the AMD, and it clearly does not fit in that hole. It's much too big. So these screws right here are for the Intel, the Intel mounting kit, and they fit perfectly in those screws. So now the question is this going to work? Am I going to be able to just use all the Intel parts with the Noctua? And what do I have to do to make this work? Most likely, I'm going to have to fit this onto the back. So this is the mounting plate that goes on the back side of the motherboard. I'm going to have to most likely take out the motherboard and put this on, and it's going to be much more in depth than I originally assumed. So I removed the back panel from the case. I was hoping there would be access to underneath the CPU. There is for the back plate, but there is not, unfortunately, so I am going to have to pull the entire motherboard. Getting actually this back panel off was quite easy. I found a video on YouTube. I'll put a link to that in the description. Okay, so standard operating procedure here. Remove cables, remove standoff screws, remove video card. I did struggle just for a moment here on this bracket for the video card. 2 screws in the top, and then it has a little clip, kind of clips on to the back side of the video card, but once I popped the front out, then the back come off just fine. One thing I like to do here is keep all my screws together, like screws together, so even though they may look very, very similar, these, for example, the standoff screws can be slightly different threading than, say, the screws for the rear I/O plate or something like that. So as I flip this over, we'll see that the back plate here is pretty much standard, other than the fact that it's reversed from the Noctua. So the Noctua has screws coming up from the back side of the board, whereas this has basically, a long sleeve nut. So essentially what we're going to have to do is pull this off and replace this with the Noctua supplied plate. Alright, so I've got this on my bench. I'm going to pop the RAM out to make sure I don't do any damage to the RAM sockets. Flip it over here and try to pull this thing off. Normally these, the stock ones are not hard to get off at all. Just apply a little pressure and they just pop right off, or sometimes they just fall right out. But in this case, as I'm applying, I would say medium pressure, I'm getting no movement, only board flex. So at this point I'm thinking they must have used some sort of contact adhesive, probably for manufacturing purposes. I can't see a functional purpose to do this. So I put my screwdriver in and give it a little twist just to see if I have any movement. Be very, very careful if you're going to do this. You do not want to dig into the board or any of the little traces. You will cause permanent damage. Ideally, I should have been using a plastic knife or a spreader of some sort to try to pry that apart. But this is what I had on hand. I felt pretty comfortable. I'm mostly pushing straight in with a little, very, very little twist. I'm making my way around the board. I can see some flex as I'm on the plate as I'm pulling around. The plate is plastic, by the way. So I'm just pulling a little bit here and there. And I would say the corners there are coming up about 1/8 of an inch I can get when I'm pulling up on it, and I can hear the adhesive starting to give way or fail. bit of crackling. So now I'm pushing down with a little more pressure. You can see the board flexing a little bit. Still trying to be very careful about what I'm pushing on. You can see here, once it gives away, it gives away pretty quickly and comes right off. There you go. See the two little areas, those little pads, or that's where the adhesive is. And looking at it just visually, that is the exact size of an Intel socket plate for a heatsink. So there's a couple different hole positions on this backing plate, and we have to figure out which one actually works for this board, since it's, this is an AMD board. Anyway, so there's this, as you can see, LGA 1200 or LGA 1700. I'm going to figure that out right now.
Thing to note is there's actually a label on here, caution. This must face the motherboard. So when I put it in, it'll be this way. So you should be able to read this word, and you shouldn't see the caution.
So I figured out that it's the inside position on the plate, which I believe is the LGA 1200 or LGA 1150. And now I'm installing the little spacers to make sure the plate is not touching the back of the motherboard. Alright, so here I'm reviewing the Intel manual real quick. The kit does come with one for AMD and one for Intel. Since we are using the Intel pieces, that's what I'm reviewing. Anyway, I'm using the blue standoffs here, which are the shorter of the two in the Intel kit. And now I'm going to place the brackets on. A little tricky, just because there are two separate holes. As we identified on the bottom, the inside, or the ones that are closest to the center, are the ones you want to use. The same is for the brackets on the top. Once those are on, there's a separate bag with various screws for Intel depending on what type of motherboard and socket you're putting it on for. Right here I'm dry fitting the heatsink just to make sure the clearances are right, because again, this is a odd setup with using the Intel hardware on an AMD system. Everything looks good. So here's that bag I was just mentioning with the additional screws. So these are just thumb screws. Thumb nuts, I should say. And I always double check. All hand tight. And now I'm going to be putting on, I think, thermal compound. Don't need a lot here. I might have been able to use a little bit more. And then I like to screw them down as evenly as possible. So I'm holding a fair bit of pressure straight down, and then I get both sides in, and then I screw them all the way down. Just checking how everything looks. Fan back on. And we should be good to get this back in the system and try it out. Alright, so here we go. I'm just moving some of the cables out of the way. Paying special attention. I actually had to do this twice because I had a cable underneath the board I didn't notice, a very small one. Screwing in all the standoffs first. One particular note about this motherboard and these standoffs, and I find this common in OEM motherboards, the standoffs have a little extra ridge on them. So they kind of snap in, I wouldn't say snap, I guess they set into the standoffs. These Wi-Fi cards are the bane of my existence. These very, very tiny, tiny, tiny antenna cables. Took quite a bit of finagling for me to get these on. And you'll notice earlier in the video I talked about keeping the screws separate or organized by where they came from and together. Well, I didn't do that for this bracket and ended up having to swap these two screws around. Yep, they look exactly the same, but one worked in the bracket and one did not. Alright, so I'm all buttoned up now, running my Prime95 test, and overall, I would say this is running really, really well. Previously, temperatures would be idling about 45 to 50, and now they're 35 to 40. And as you can see right here, our range was anywhere from 57 to 62, running the test for about 7-8 minutes, averaging about 58 Celsius. Really, really good numbers for just air cooling, I think. The only thing that could improve on these without changing too much would be replacing that rear and or front fan to get a little bit more airflow throughout the case. Overall, again, really happy with the results for 59 bucks.
Let me know what you think. If you hate it, you love it. If I could be doing something better, I'm just some dude in the basement. I certainly don't do this for profit. It's just I like kind of sharing what I'm working on, and hopefully it'll be useful for somebody else.